Okay, welcome back to Mangging for my Dungeon Crawl Classics primer. At this point, all that really remains in this massive book are spells and the bestiary. There's a few appendixes that talk about a little different stuff, and there's some sections about, like, DMing. The usual DM judge advice chapter. But, yeah, for the most part, the bulk of this book is magic spells. Let's see if I can find page numbers to give you an idea here. Maybe not. Let's see. So chapter 5 starts on page 104 and ends on page 304. So that's 200 pages just consisting of spells and spell information. The bestiary is from 376 to 452, so that's also a decent chunk of the book. The actual rules, that's not a major part of the book. But alright, magic. Let us get into it finally. So, magic is a staple of fantasy role-playing games. You can do fantasy with no magic whatsoever. Very, very, low fantasy, I guess. Where magic is not even hinted at. And, the fantasy element is due to some sort of different realm, different location than the norm, and, maybe different technology, maybe the presence of deities, but that's not necessarily magic. No one can wield the power of deities. You can do things like that. That usually doesn't tend to interest me, though. And you can have settings where magic is very uncommon, very rare, very dangerous. I'm thinking something of Conan or Game of Thrones. If you watch Game of Thrones or read the books, magic is a pretty small element to the setting. Most of the people within the setting within Westeros and all that do not interact with magic. It's very low fantasy in that aspect. The presence of dragons all of a sudden is obviously a very big deal. Things like that. Or you can have, obviously, the opposite, where magic is prevalent all over. Every village has their local mage, their local druid, their local wizard that is capable of wielding these magical forces and is capable of bending them to his or her will. And within RPGs, within tabletop RPGs, fantasy, games run the similar gamut. You have RPGs where magic is very rarely given to the player characters. You have fantasy settings where no player character can use magic, or you have games where you can use magic, but it's almost more ritualistic. You're not throwing out fireballs from the palm of your hands. You're doing different things in ritual formats where you're trying to sort of call upon the weather to change or to have some specific effect ahead of time. It's much more low-key than all the crazy magic that some of us are used to. And then you have other games, such as Dungeons & Dragons, where anybody can be a wizard or a mage. or a druid, or whatever they want if they so choose. And there's all these different spells that they can access, and by level 1 they're already casting burning hands, and fire is erupting from their fingertips, and they have full control over it. Whenever they want, they can just to an extent. In Dungeons and Dragons specifically, magic is pretty controlled most of the time. When a wizard, becomes a wizard, he picks, I want this spell, I want this spell, I want this spell, and okay, I can use this many spells per day, and I keep track of that, and when I roll the die, this effect happens, and either it happens or it just fails. And that's pretty much it, and that's how magic works. It's all very controlled and calculated, to an extent. Which is not bad. I'm not shitting on it, and when I'm playing a game like that and I'm coming up with a plan for a situation that involves magic and the use of magic, there is a benefit that it is so calculated. It is very specific. That's not bad, but magic should be that's a dangerous phrase, should be, but I think if magic were to be a real element that was so controlled and calculated, the effects that it would have on the setting would be traumatic. It would be, these massive... The setting would revolve around magic. Because it would be such a big deal that these things are just available to not anybody, but almost anybody. Magic is so prevalent that it would take over, things that would normally require mundane technology or man hours or whatever that could just be snapped with a finger. That's a big deal. And so I think it makes far more sense if magic were real, if magic existed within a setting. It would make more sense for the setting for magic to be far more chaotic, to be far less predictable. And that's where Dungeon Crawl Classics come in, where magic is anything but predictable. As you'll see, I don't really have to explain it. You're going to see it as I go through the chapter. But yes, this is a game where magic is completely, somewhat unpredictable, dangerous, and not meant for almost anybody. Not that, if you want to play DCC as a spellcaster, you have to go through this, strict, sort of recruiting process. No, if you want to play a spellcaster, you can play a spellcaster, but you will discover that it's quite a bit different from Dungeons and Dragons. So, wizards and clerics are the only spellcaster. Well, elves. We'll lump those in with wizards. Those are the only two spellcasters in the game, and they cast different types of magic. So I've sort of gone over cleric stuff. We'll get to cleric spells later, but most of the really interesting stuff comes from wizards. Because wizards' magic is this sort of esoteric energy that is pulled from nebulous sources. This energy can come from, dimensions of fire. If you're casting a fireball, you are basically pulling this mysterious energy that you really don't understand from this dimension of fire. Not necessarily, but this is an example. You're pulling it from this dimension of just pure fire, and you're trying to harvest some of that and focus it into a given effect, into a ball of fire hurled at a location that you choose. And wizards spend their entire lives trying to figure out how the hell that makes sense and how it works. And there's a lot of things that can go wrong. You can also, of course, be granted energy and power from different entities, as we discussed. Demons and devils and Cthulhu, places like that. There's a lot of energy out there, and humans and elves and, people like that are not necessarily the best suited to be messing around with it. But, yeah, so basically, when you become a wizard in DCC, this is sort of the official rule, but of course all of this can be changed. If you don't like it, if you don't want to do this, if this does not sit well with you or your table or whatever, you can of course change it. But pretty much by the rules, when you become a wizard, you start with, give or take, 4 spells. These spells are determined entirely randomly. You do not get to pick, under normal situations, what spells are available to you. If your judge is kind, maybe he'll let you... If he's really kind, maybe he'll let you pick all 4. If he's somewhat kind, maybe he'll let you pick 1 or 2. He might... He or she, whatever. He or she might pick the 4 himself. Or, most entertainingly, you'll just roll on a random table to decide what you get. And, you might get some really cool level 1 spells that can do some definite damage. You might get Choking Cloud or Chill Touch or Magic Missile or something like that. Or you might get some, more questionable stuff that you have to find uses for. Spider Climb and Runic Alphabet, Rope Work, Magic Shield, Mending, and of course you can also get the Invoke Patron spell, letting you invoke a entity to call upon them. So yeah, by the rules, completely random. If you do get Invoke Patron, you automatically get the Patron Bond, and vice versa. Those are joined spells, so if you get one, you get the other. And elves, of course, automatically get those in addition to their other spells. Okay, so you're level 1 wizard. You've just survived a funnel. The judge hands you some random spells rolled on a table. But that's not all. Oh no, there's more randomness. For each spell that you receive, you get to roll on the Mercurial Magic table. This is a D100 roll, and it's modified by luck to a greater degree than normal. It's your luck modifier times 10. So if you have a +1 luck mod, you add 10 to your Mercurial Magic roll, because the higher effects are better. Because basically, when one wizard casts a fireball, he's not following a recipe. He's not going on, magicspells.com and like, oh yeah, fireball, okay. He's basically just tinkered around with shit up in a tower or whatever until, okay, boom, fireball, yeah. And that's very different than the next wizard over, who's tinkering on his own time, or been taught by some other guy, or who knows how, or, this spell has been given to him by a demon, and how the demon casts fireball is very different than the guy tinkering in his tower. These are not set recipes. This is just mortals messing around with forces beyond their control. So, Mercurial Magic is rolled for each spell, and there's 100 effects here, and so every single time you cast that spell, you also get this effect. So, as long as that character lives and they have those spells are linked with that mercurial magic effect. So every time they cast it. There are some effects here that are sort of cumulative. Like, it's like each time you cast it, it adds a 1% chance to blah, 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 blah. So, you know, throughout the life of your character, you might cast the same spell, like Magic Missile. You might cast that 50, 60 times, and eventually something big is going to happen. So, yeah, I guess you probably want to hear some mercurial magic effects. So, the number one result is every time the wizard casts the spell, someone he knows dies. Judge's choice. So yeah, if you get that connected to your Magic Missile, every time you cast Magic Missile, someone you know dies. And obviously that can include people in your party. And it's not even like, I mean, it's the judge's choice, which seems really cruel. Or nice, depending on the judge. You could just be like, okay, it's some guy you met when you were 6, or, you know, it's not, you know, it's all stuff like that. But I know Ziggy, when there's like random effects like that, a lot of the times he'll just sort of like assign die numbers. So he might do it where it's like a D100 roll, and if it's a 1, you know, someone in the party dies. He might do stuff like that. So that can happen. What else do we got here? Counter Magic Bubble. In the round following the casting of the spell, all other spells, including the wizard's own, cast within 100 feet, suffer a -4 penalty to spell checks. Each time the wizard casts this spell, one of his fingers or toes melts away. For every 2 digits lost, he suffers a permanent -1 penalty to agility. Digits can be replaced by magic, but if the wizard ever runs out of them, he cannot cast this spell. So, yeah, you pretty much permanently lose a digit each time you cast a spell. That'll make you freaking think twice about casting Magic Missile. Now, obviously, that's pretty shit. But that's magic. And that's, you know, that's not for everybody. Not everybody likes shit like that, but I think it's awesome. God, there's a lot of cool ones. Here we go. Planar Rift. Casting the spell tears jagged holes. It says casting the spell tears jagged hole. I think it's a jagged hole. In the warp and weft of the multiverse. There is a cumulative 1% chance that a horror from the outer dark steps through the rift. The fearsome creature has hit dice equal to the caster's level +5. Roll 1d3. 1. The monster steals the spell from the PC's mind before vanishing forever. So, you never get to cast that shit again. 2. The monster attacks the PC with the intent to slay the caster. Or 3, the monster seeks to strike a bargain with the caster, offering the PC forbidden knowledge in exchange for the souls of the caster's party. Wonderful. You know, the spell requires twice the normal time to cast. After casting the spell, wizard must make a fort save. DC 5 plus the spell's level, so pretty easy, but shit happens. Or fall into a deep sleep for 1 day for each level of the spell. He cannot be awakened by any mundane or magical means during this time. Jesus. Like, you're in the middle of the dungeon, you cast some spell, and you go to sleep for a day. No question about it. That's like you out for the session. Or you better hope your friends are nice. God, there's so many, man. There's so many. Casting this spell has a 50% chance of causing the caster or another nearby person to forget a spell of equal level for the day, as if they had failed a spell check. If they do not have a spell of the appropriate level, he takes damage equal to 1d6 plus the spell's level. Casting of this spell causes a randomly determined item of steel or iron to corrode and pit in a 15-foot radius around the caster. Item corroded by the casting is always of dagger size or larger and chosen at random. Nice. Obviously, these are all pretty bad stuff because this is the bottom of the table. We'll get to better stuff. No range. The spell has no range and can only be cast by touching the target. Casting the spell accesses the memories of a dying god. The caster must succeed on a DC 13 will save, or be overcome by hallucinations of a bloody god war that lasts 1d3 rounds. But if he ever rolls a crit on the will save, he triumphs over the god and is never troubled by hallucinations again. That's pretty nice, because you can actually, you know, beat that one, and you can be done. And once you dispel it, all future spell checks for this spell are made with 1d24, so you get a boost to the spell. That's pretty sweet. Let's see here. Casting the spell causes blood to ooze from the wizard's pores. No damage is inflicted, but the wizard looks like a gory mess. At the judge's discretion, this may also attract predators. Nice. Due to the ineffable demands of magic, this spell must be shouted when cast, effectively negating any chance of the caster remaining undetected before the casting is completed. So that is not a stealth spell ever. Casting the spell causes the wizard to temporarily transform into the opposite gender. This sex change remains in effect for 1 hour per level of the spell. But if you fail the spell check, you are shifted for 24 hours. Each time this spell is cast, there's a random 10 to 60% chance that the wizard's luck score is altered by its magic. If the wizard's luck is affected, it is either raised 1d3 points or lowered 1d3 points. 50-50 chance. Well, there you go. You could get a pretty high luck that way, I guess. You could gamble. Each time the spell is cast, one random item within 20 feet of the caster is turned to lead, and another is turned to gold. Both objects probably weigh more than they previously did, and the gold object is worth twice its normal cost, or 1 gold piece, whichever is more. So, yeah, you could be casting spells just for the mercurial magic effect. In some situations. Yeah, so we're starting to get into some of the better stuff. Each time the wizard casts this spell, he predicts the numerical result of his spell check roll. If he rolls this number exactly, the spell automatically recasts itself each round for 1d3 rounds. Cool. God, there's a lot of just like weird ones that aren't like, oh my god, look at that. Like whenever you cast it, like pale white worms crawl forth from the earth, writhing in fiery agony before expiring on the open ground. They don't do anything. There's like no real effect. It's just like, oh my god, these worms are coming out of the ground. And yeah, you could use that in some situation, possibly. At his discretion, the wizard is able to cast this spell silently. He need not speak, and any auditory effects of the spell can be suppressed. The wizard can cast this spell using ESP alone. He need not move, speak, breathe, or use any material ingredients to invoke the effects. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Plague of rats. Thousands of rats, mice, moles, and voles pour from the caster's sleeves, robes, and pockets, scattering in every direction. Physical attacks against the caster are softened by 1d4 points of damage. The blow cushioned by the squealing tide of rodents. It's just fucking magic, man. We haven't even gotten to the spells themselves. This is just like the incidentals slapped on top. By casting this spell, the wizard hurls himself into the warp of multiple realities. 1d7 plus 1 duplicates of the caster appear, identical in nearly every respect, but each drawn from its own parallel universe. There's a 1% chance per spell level that the original caster vanishes into one of the alternate realities, replaced by a nearly identical incarnation of opposite alignment and patron. So yes, you would you get a copy of yourself to play as with the opposite alignment. Why not? And then we get into some of the really high stuff. The caster is allowed to roll twice for any random element of the spell, duration, damage, number affected, etc., and take whichever result he wishes. That's very good. All within 15 feet of the caster, both friend and foe, are healed 1d6 points of damage for every level of the spell. So, yeah, that's pretty good. You act as like a backup cleric when out of combat, really. This spell is powered by the energies of the living. The nearest creature other than the caster takes 1d6 HP of damage per spell level. For every 2 HP lost, the spell check result is increased by +1. And here's the best effect. Instead of rolling as normal on a spell check, the wizard rolls a die type improved by 2 steps on the dice chain. So if you normally roll 1d20, you roll a 1d30. Yeah, so having a spell that you, at level 1, roll a d30 on instead of a d20, very good. So there's a lot of fun ones in there. Very good stuff. Then it talks about corruption, which we already went over, so I don't really need to go into that again, but that's fun stuff. And there's also a table here for generic spell misfires. So, you know, for whatever reason you don't want to use the misfire effects listed for each spell, there's generic ones for any type of spell. Nearest ally is partially transformed into an animal. The wizard inadvertently causes a torrential downpour of flower petals, garden snails, cow dung, rotten vegetables, iron ingots, or snakes. Explosion centered on the nearest creature. Stuff like that. Fun stuff. A lot of random stuff. There's rules for... There's rules for ritual magic. So there are some spells that you can cast as a ritual. So you can basically get a bunch of other wizards to sort of lend their energy to a spell that you're casting and to give it a bonus. And you can also increase the time of the casting. Basically, you're joining together to get a better effect out of a spell. And you can also sacrifice treasure or creatures as part of a ritual to get a bonus as well. You can stand in a location of power. So if you're standing on some sort of site linked to the elemental plane of fire and you cast a fireball spell, you probably should get a bonus. You can find rare spell components to give you a bonus. You can take automatic corruption to get a bonus. So on and so forth. And then they talk about finding new spells. So basically... when you get a new level, of course, you probably get a spell, and by default, again, it's determined randomly, but throughout your travels, throughout your quests, your adventures, you may come across information related to a specific spell. And this could be the purpose for a quest, is that, you know, you heard a rumor of some wizard that could throw fireballs. So, you know, he could throw fire from his fingertips, according to legend. And you might seek that out because you're interested. Oh, I want to throw fire from my fingertips. And so you might do a whole adventure related to that. And then at the end, you find the wizard's notes or something, or his spell book, or who knows what. And he's got information about that. And so because you have that, when you level up and you get a new spell, you can say, okay, I want to learn this spell, this fireball spell. And by default, you don't automatically learn it. You have to pass a spell check, which is explained in the judges section. That's by default. You know, if the judge is kind, he just might give it to you, because you did a whole adventure for it. But yeah, nothing's easy. Okay, so we should probably get to the spells, because we're half an hour into this. Alright, so this is the basic page. This is how it looks for a spell. You get the level there. Next to that is the range of the spell that you can cast it at. Usually you're going to see things like varies, so duration varies. The casting time is 1 round, and there's no save because it's not related to any of that. Then you have a general description of the spell. So animal summoning. The caster invokes animal spirits to summon forth a mundane animal. The caster must be familiar with the animal type and have some material remnant to expend in casting the spell, like hair, fur, paw, tooth, skull, etc. So that's your basic description. Then you have the manifestation roll. So this is, in addition to mercurial magic, this is how the spell manifests when you cast it. So for this, it's a d4 roll. Either an egg shimmers into existence, then hatches into the animal summoned, or a flash of dark clouds and the animal appears, or the animal's skeleton appears first, then organs appear, then muscles knit them together, then skin grows and the animal appears, or the animal erupts from the ground fully formed. And really this is just meant to give some flavor. There's not really any mechanics related to this. It's just a little bit of cool flavor related to how the spell looks. Then you have the corruption roll, the random corruption effects related to each spell. So it's a d8 roll for animal summoning. Wizard takes on minor facial trait of the animal he attempted to summon, such as whiskers, longer ears, cat eyes, etc. Wizard emits an odor, which humans find strange, but animals find irresistible. And then the rest are just minor corruption, major corruption, greater corruption. So it's not like there's there's 8 effects for each spell. A lot of it is generally linking to the different regular corruption tables. And some spells, they really couldn't come up with unique ones, so it's just all linking to the regular corruption tables. Then you have the misfire effects. I think every spell has unique misfire effects. I don't think they screwed you on that. So, for animal summoning, it's a d4 roll. Caster inadvertently summons a swarm of aggravating insects, such as bees, wasps, or locusts. Caster only summons part of an animal, causing a pile of bloody rabbit ears, severed goat horns, dislocated wolf legs, or bloody viscera to appear. Nice. Or caster correctly summons an animal, but incorrectly places it inside a nearby building or terrain feature or the floor/ground. The animal dies instantly and its body is difficult to recover now. So those are all fun. And then you get the actual effects. So for most spells, this is going to be... It's going to be contingent on your dice roll for your spell check. So you roll your dice, you add your modifier, so on and so forth, and then you compare your number to the table. So if you've got a 1 total, which is shit, you lose the spell, which means you cannot cast that anymore until you rest for the day. It's a failure, obviously. And then you roll a 1d6 modified by luck. And the effect there is either going to be corruption, misfire, and patron taint, which is pretty bad, or just corruption, or just patron taint, or misfire. So obviously that's the worst effect. If you roll a 2 through 11, you lose the spell for the day, and it's just a failure. No misfires or anything like that. Then, as you go up from there, we get progressively more interesting. So the most basic success for animal summoning is you summon 1 mundane animal of 1 hit dice or less. Music is like... I'm like yelling over it. Okay, so you summon any mundane animal that you have some material with and you've seen. And of 1 hit dice or less, it remains for up to 1 hour, though it hungers, thirsts, and rests as normal. It obeys the caster's commands within normal bounds. Suicidal commands, or those contrary to its nature, have a 50% chance of releasing the animal from service. And due to the nature of the summoning, the caster cannot directly harm the creature summoned. So that's the most basic effect. You know, that's certainly doable. Pretty much at like level 1, if you have a +1 mod to your roll, you have like a 50-50 chance of succeeding or failure of some type. So, you know, it gets better from there. So then the next effect, 14 to 17, is you can summon 1 animal of up to 2 hit dice or 2 animals of 1 hit dice or less. And then the next one up, 18 to 19. 1 mundane animal of up to 2 hit dice or 2 animals of 1 hit dice or less, but it remains for 2 hours. And it gets progressively higher and higher and better, all the way up to a 32 or higher on your roll. You summon a large group of mundane animals. This could be a herd of cattle, a pride of lions, a flock of geese, or a pack of wolves. Total hit dice must be 100 or less. They remain for up to a week. They obey the caster's commands and even undertake suicidal commands, or those contrary to their nature. So that's obviously the best animal summoning effect that you could get. You get a whole herd or pack of animals ready to obey your suicidal commands. So you can see then, you know, at level 1, you're not going to get a 32 or higher normally. And so these spells progressively get better and better as a wizard grows more powerful. Because you're much more easily capable of getting these higher numbered effects. So these spells scale with you. You know, instead of having a level 1 spell that is sort of shit when you're level 6 or something like that, the level 1 spells are almost always going to continue to be usable in some sense. Because they get progressively better. But that is not to say that you can't achieve a 32 effect at level 1. Because now we get to talk about spell burn. Okay, so spell burn. When you cast a spell, before you make a roll related to the spell, you may declare that you are going to do spell burn. To do this, you expend as many points as you want of your strength, agility, or stamina. So your physical attributes. And for every point that you spend, that you burn, you get +1 to your spell check. Which means, yes, if you throw away 10 points of your strength, if you're that strong, you get a +10 to your result on top of everything else. And if you sacrifice 20 points, which is obviously probably about everything you've got, you treat your roll as a natural 20. I don't know if that's in addition. I think that's in addition to you getting +20, which means that if you spend 20 points, you get the highest effect for the spell. Because you get basically a 40. You get the best effect. That's how I would rule it. Because that's that's giving every physical part of you to a spell just for it to work. And yeah, so you do that, and you burn points. And each day that you do not attempt spell burn, you recover 1 ability point. So, Spellburn is not something you're going to spam, because it takes a while to recover. But it's very clutch. You can also use Spellburn to cast spells you've lost for the day. So, if you rolled badly and you lost a spell. If you expend a lost spell's level in ability score points, you can cast the spell as if you still had it. So you can burn 2 points to cast a level 2 spell that you'd lost for the day. And those don't give you a bonus. You'd have to spend extra if you wanted a Spellburn bonus. If you roll a critical fail while casting a spell that you've used Spellburn on, so you're like, really hoping this works. If you roll a natural 1, you lose the points, obviously. You get corruption. You get all the bad effects, and you lose 1 point of ability score permanently, never to be recovered. Yeah. Basically, rarely clerics are allowed to Spellburn as well, but generally it's reserved for wizards. Because what Spellburn is you basically making a dark pact. You are basically saying to some sort of dark entity in the nether, take my fucking body and help me with this spell. That's pretty much what you're saying. And they're like, okay. Because that's what they do. So, yeah, every time you're doing Spellburn, you are making a dark pact with some sort of entity. Let it be known. But there is roleplay potential here. So, there is a D24 table here of Spellburn actions. So these are sort of the roleplay effects that are actually occurring in-game when you declare, I'm Spellburning. So this is not just, points on it, let me roll and give me bonus. No, this is some serious shit. So, when you Spellburn, you roll on this table. And this determines what exactly you're doing. Here. So if you roll a 4, you cut off one of your fingertips. So that's the explanation of where your agility points just went as part of your sacrifice. You cut off one of your fingertips. Just, picturing, this is a dark perspective here. You're in combat with some people or something, and you're uttering some, dark phrases, black speech and stuff, and you pull out a dagger and you just cut off your fingertip, and then a fireball comes out. It's some dark stuff. Here you go. You must yank out your hair and burn it. The wizard promises his soul to serve a powerful demon in the afterlife. The wizard must pull out a fingernail and burn it with incense. Ugh. What else do we got here? The wizard must cut his cheeks and let the blood flow down his face. The wizard must place his hand into an open flame. The wizard must sacrifice one of his most favored possessions. The wizard must walk on one leg for the remainder of the day. Huh. And these, you don't have to roll on this table. Let me be clear. You don't have to roll on this table. Even the book says you don't have to. But if you're looking for ideas to sort of flavor your Spellburn, you can roll on this. Otherwise, you can just role play yourself and come up with whatever is appropriate to the situation that you would do, or whatever, the judge can say, okay, your entity demands this, and so you do it. It's just there to give you ideas. So yeah, and then in addition, if you've bonded with a patron, you've used the patron bond spell and all of that, and either you've picked a patron or the judge has picked one for you, or whatever. Patrons have their own Spellburn effects. So, one of the patrons listed in the book is Bulbul Bobug Boobles. Alright, he's the Lord of Amphibians. He's a demon lord of amphibians. And so, each patron in the book, there's a few of them, they have their own invoke patron effects. So this is when you cast invoke patron, this is the table you look at to determine what exactly happens. So for the Lord of Amphibians, he sends a plague of toads, or he turns the ground around you into a swamp, or he sends a giant devil frog, or a toad fiend, stuff like that. And if you ever roll real shit when doing something, you roll on the patron taint list for your patron. So these are all sorts of very detailed, really shitty stuff. Patron taint is not too good. Like for the amphibian guy, basically all the effects are there to turn you into a frogman. So if you get all those, you're pretty much a big frogman that is reviled. And then each patron has a few spells, unique to that patron, that the patron can grant the wizard. So rather than going out and finding information or rolling randomly, if you are bonded with a patron, he might just provide you with different spells. So like the frog guy has tadpole transformation, which allow you to turn into like a really like beefed up beefcake toad tadpole thing. It's actually pretty good. Or it allows you to turn the area around you into a swamp at will. Like the highest level effect lets you turn an area up to 20,000 cubic feet into a swamp to a depth of about a foot. Basically, you can like sink castles with that ability. Or this spell, Bottom Feeder Bond, lets you just become friends with all swamp creatures. That's probably not as good, but you never know. The Spellburn, that's what I was talking about originally. So, the amphibian dude's Spellburn effects. So, this is like Bobo Boobles needs the blood of a dry dweller, a creature that lives only on land. The caster's blood will do. So that's the most basic one. That's just sort of, he just saps your shit. Here you go. This is a fun one. See, the Demon Lord of Amphibians needs the feet of a man creature. In this special situation, the character can spellburn up to 10 points of ability score loss, but need not take any physical action or damage. If he sacrifices the feet of a man creature, any humanoid will do, to Babu Boobles before the next sunrise, the character takes no spell burn. If he fails to find such a sacrifice, he takes the full 10 points, distributed across ability scores at the judge's discretion at the next sunrise. So yes, that lets you spell burn 10 points, just, okay, yeah, here you go. But then you have to cut off somebody's feet and sacrifice them to the Demon Lord of Amphibians. You know, I understand, like, if that's not everyone's cup of tea for their fantasy game, yeah, Frodo, you know, what, I don't know. That, you know, it's all sunshine and happiness, and hey, man, we're just adventuring, we're having a good time. Nobody's talking about feet severing and sacrifices to dark gods around here. Those are the villains. Well, no, not in DCC. In DCC, power comes at a cost. Even if you're using it for good, you might do some dirty shit. So, you know, find the nearest beggar and chop off his feet. Here a bunch of snakes crawl out of the ground and bite his ankles and begin sucking his blood. That's nice. So, a lot of spellburn effects are just basically, like, descriptive things to sort of flavor the situation, to help with role-playing, like, if you are bonded with the Lord of Amphibians, over time you're either going to develop a reputation, or you yourself are going to sort of turn more frog-like, things like that, sort of meant to flavor. But there are some effects, spellburn effects and stuff like that, that are less, that are not just flavor, and you actually have to do some dark shit. Azi Dahaka, one of the spellburn effects, basically just involve you sacrificing one or more creatures in order to fuel the spellburn. Or he might, instead of taking your physical traits, the entity might just say, okay, go here and do this. Go on this quest for me to obtain this for me. Otherwise, I'm gonna sap your shit. A lot of your shit. So there's all sorts of stuff like that. God, we're 51 minutes. How many spells have I talked about? Like one? Yeah, obviously I'm not going to go over all these spells as much as I would love to. This series would just go on forever. But, the level 1 spells, I can just sort of go over them real quick. Cantrip, that's an old standby that lets you create, light little visual effects and maybe move small things from a distance. Basic, tiny little magic stuff. Charm Person, that lets you basically, turn somebody, mental control them into being your friend. Although the higher level stuff lets you basically turn an entire, arena into your just mindless slaves. Chill Touch, you can just freeze people, do some damage, extra damage to undead. Choking Cloud, Choking Cloud, the basic effect is just this tiny little cloud that surrounds one person for a few rounds, and they take -1 to rolls. But at max level, you're bringing down 3 massive clouds that kill everything inside of them. There's just the difference in effects in power. And like I said, with Spellburn, you can get some crazy effects if need be at level 1. If you're willing to really, put your life on the line and things like that. And that's so freaking cool, man. So, you have to declare Spellburn before the roll. That's the thing. So, you're still at the whimsy of the roll, but you can help yourself out a little bit at some cost. Color Spray, Comprehend Languages. There's a lot of old standbys in here. Ekim's Mystical Mask lets you sort of get Infravision, or Instill Fear. Enlarge, so you can make things bigger. But there's also a bunch of spells you can flip the effects. Not at will. You either learn the basic effect, or for whatever reason you've learned the opposite effect. So instead of learning Enlarge, you might learn Reduce instead, and so it's just the opposite effect. And so those are sort of lumped together because it's a similar effect. Featherfall, Find Familiar, so you can bond a familiar with you. Flaming Hands, which is just burning hands, and so it's got some good artwork of some burninating going on there. And the basic effect is, it's one little burst of fire for 1d3 points of damage out to 15 feet. But the massive effect is a 360 arc outward from your body. And so just everything around you out to 40 feet take 10 damage plus your character level. So that's nice. And so that's just the really cool thing about it, is you can just be at the whimsy of magic to an extent. Or if you're okay, our lives are on the line. Our entire party depends on this just massive magical outburst. You can just drain yourself completely and... it's very cool. Magic Missile, Magic Shield, Mending. There's a bunch of level 1 effects. And the higher level effects are not necessarily better. It depends Like, invisibility. That's a really useful ability. That's a level 2 spell. So, even at the most basic, that's really good. Whereas, like, the most basic of something like Mending is questionable. Invisible Companion. Knock, so you can open any lock. Even the most basic effect of Knock lets you just sort of open a mundane lock of almost any size or type. But then the super effect of Knock, in a staggering display of power, the caster causes all portals within 1 mile to blast open in a violent burst. This includes windows and shutters, cellar stairs and attic trapdoors, and oven doors and city gates, as well as normal doors and portals. Objects are affected regardless of size, complexity, or magic protection. Even secret or invisible doors suddenly open. And passages concealed by tapestries are suddenly revealed. There's 25% chance that any given portal is also destroyed in the display of magic. Normal fasteners and stoppers are loosened or dislodged, such that wine corks fizz open, lids fall off dinner pots, shoelaces unlace, snaps loosen, belts unbuckle, and so on. Like, that's power! And so yeah, a level 1 character in DCC is somewhat frail, somewhat likely to die, but when you get up there in levels, man, the power is certainly there. You're capable of some crazy shit. Levitate, locate object. Look at this. This is one spell, level 2 spell, locate object. It's both pages. All of this are spell effects for locate object. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of repeat stuff in there, but still, a lot of this book is just spell information. So, as much as I'd love to just sit here and read every spell to you, it's really probably not worth it. Get the book yourself and read through it. Yeah, so as for cleric stuff, you know, they get a lot of the nicer stuff, like creating food and holy sanctuaries, detecting magic, creating darkness. They don't get a whole lot of smiteful stuff. Let me just look. God, there's so many spells. Let's see here. Yeah, level 1, I don't think a cleric is a single harmful spell, other than turn unholy, which is just a default thing. Level 2, they get stuff like Banish and Curse, Stinging Stone. Level 3, they can animate Dead, which is sort of heretical. Bolt from the Blue, Exorcise, Spiritual Weapon, True Name. Level 4, they get Cause Earthquake, Affliction of the Gods, Vermin Blight. Level 5, they get Righteous Fire, Weather Control, or Whirling Doom. So, yeah, a level whatever cleric can certainly bring the pain as well, but not quite to the insane destructive degree, perhaps, of a wizard. And, as I sort of went over, the patrons all have a bunch of spells as well. And those are cool as well. But we're already almost at an hour here, so I don't want to do it, but we gotta stop. There's just a lot of cool stuff in this book. It's just a book that I'm happy to own. 30 years from now, I can read over some of this stuff and be like, oh man, that's fantasy at its coolest. There's some really fun stuff in here. But yeah, I tend to geek out at this stuff no matter what, so maybe that's not a perfect review. But, alright, I guess that'll about wrap us up. So, next time we'll look at the Judges chapter a little bit. Not to a great degree, but we'll go over stuff like, we'll go over the magic items chapter a little bit. Magic items are not a dime a dozen in this game. It's more the idea of like Lord of the Rings, where magic items and artifacts are pretty hard to come by, and each one sort of has a story and an identity, rather than just, oh, I have a +3 sword, oh. So, magic artifacts and stuff in this game are not going to come by often, but they're pretty cool when you do. And wands and rings and the one ring and blah, blah, blah. And then we get the monster chapter, which will be pretty cool. I'll leave you looking at this stuff. Look at that. It's like a unicorn fighting a goblin. I don't know why. But, yeah. So we'll go over the bestiary. There's definitely some highlights in there. Looking at all the demons and... Look at this shit. Look at this shit. You don't even know what that is. I don't even know what that is. Alright, that about wraps us up. So, my name is Mang. This has been another part in my primer on Dungeon Crawl Classics. And stick around for probably the final part next time.